We begin today the Gemara at the beginning of Daf Samach Zayin. The Gemara here is discussing the halacha of Nichsei Tzoyim Barzel, which is the possessions that a woman brings into marriage, and she writes into the ksuba, a contract with her husband, that he takes responsibility, that if he divorces her or he passes away, she's going to get those possessions back, the value that it has today. There was machlokes between Rav Yehuda and Rav Ami whether she can collect the item itself. Rav Yehuda says she can come and say, I want the item itself. Rav Ami says, no, that's not the responsibility the husband took. The husband can give it just a value, and the item itself he can keep. The Gemara here brought that the halacha is like Rav Yehuda, that she can take the item itself. But the Gemara did explain that even according to Rav Yehuda, that she could take the item itself, it's a shibud. She has that right of collection. It's still in the possession of the husband, or if the husband died, the yarshim, they hold on to it, but she has a right to take it. So the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Yehuda, Hechnisa loy shnei kelim. If she brought 2 kelim into the marriage, the elav zuz, and their value was 1,000 zuz. V'shavchu v'amdu al shnei alofen. And now they appreciated, and their value is 2,000. So echad, so one of these kelim nitlasei b'ksubasa. She can take it back because of the contract that she wrote into the ksubah, that value of 1,000 her husband will give her back. So now one of those kelim is worth that value of 1,000. She says she can take it. And the echad, and another one, if she wants to have it back, so then she can demand it. And they send as damim. She can pay the money of it to her husband or the yarshim. V'nitlasei, and she has the right to take it. Mipnei shvach beisavia, because of the same svara that we said before, that what was the whole reason why she made this contract with her husband? Because this is assets from her father, from her family, so it's important to her. So therefore, she can take the kelim back itself. So over here, even though that second keli is beyond the value that she made up, but nevertheless, she has the right to say, I want to pay for it, and I want to get the keli back. So if I frag the Gemara, my kamash malon. What's the chiddush over here in this statement of Rabbi Yehuda? Shvach beisavia dida have, that the point there is that because this is assets that came from her father's house, so therefore it's hers, and therefore even this that was higher than the value that she made up, nevertheless she can go ahead and demand it and pay for it. That's what it seems like the chiddush over here is. Like the Gemara, but ha'amra Rav Yehuda chadazimne. This is exactly what Rav Yehuda said before. B'chlal, regarding Nichsei Tzoyim Barzel, that she doesn't only get the value, she gets the keli itself if she wants. So over here, the fact that she gets even a keli that's higher than the value they made up, as long as she pays for it, but it's the same point that the whole reason for this deal was that she should be able to get back her possessions itself. Says the Gemara, no, there's a chiddush here, because Mao, the Teime, I would think to say, Hanemili, Heichedematye le Mishkol B'ksubasa. This that he said, that Rabbi Yehuda said that she can take the keli itself, and the husband can't just pay the value of it, that's when she's coming to take those possessions that match that value that she made up. But at Avo mitten domi mishkal. But if then it appreciated in value, and now she wants to take more than what the value is, and she wants to pay for it, so maybe loy. Maybe so far it doesn't go. Maybe that the husband can say to her, listen, you take those kelim that are the value we made up, and the rest I keep. Why? You can't pay me for it. This doesn't belong to you. Kamash malam. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda says, no, that's also part of the deal here, that she has the right to go and take all the kelim that she gave, and then she can pay for it. That's the chiddush what Rabbi Yehuda is saying, how far this goes. I wonder how you evaluate this with the rate of inflation. You have to also include that in the value, or if you give a keli and 50 years ago it was worth $100 and today it's worth $1,000, how does it work? Okay, stam shaila. Zok the Heilige Mishnah, continuing over here, the halacha b'nigeya to eating the trumah. So obviously a kohen himself could eat trumah, but there are different scenarios of a isha that's married to a kohen that eats trumah, or a eved that eats trumah. So the Gemara, the Mishnah continues these halachas. Bas Yisrael shenissus lekohen. So you have a Yisrael, a Bas Yisrael that's married to a kohen, umeis, and the kohen passes away. V'hinicha muberes, and she is pregnant. So now Rashi says the case over here is that she's pregnant, but it could be that she also has other children. What's the halacha of a Bas Yisrael that was married to a kohen and now her husband, the kohen, passes away? So the halacha always is, if she had children with the kohen, because of those children that she has that are kohenim, and that doesn't even mean necessarily a child, even if it's only a grandchild that's alive, from that marriage, she can eat trumah. But if zera ein la, if she has no children, so then she can't eat any truma. She goes back to her status of being a regular bas Yisrael and she can't eat truma. So here we're talking about a woman that was married to a kohen and her husband passed away, and she has children from this kohen, so she could certainly eat truma. But besides her having children, she's also pregnant. Hinicha mu'beres. So here the halacha will be loy yoichlu avodea betruma. If she owns slaves, those slaves cannot eat truma. So usually, before the Mishnah explains the reason for this, just to clarify here now, usually this woman, if she could eat truma because she has children that are kain, and or even just one child that's a kain and she could eat truma, so then her avodim could also eat truma, like her. That's usually the halacha. But over here, the chiddush of the Mishnah is, if she's pregnant, so even though she could eat truma because she has other children that are kainim, but nevertheless, the avodim she has will not be able to eat truma, and the reason is mipnei chelkai shel uber, because of the chelik of the uber. What does chelkai shel uber over here mean? So Rashi explains, and we see this in the Gemara, which kind of avodim are we speaking about? We're not speaking about avodim of nichsei melug. Avodim of nichsei melug are avodim that she owns. Those are her avodim. If her husband passes away, they're her avodim. If she can eat truma, they can eat truma. We're talking about the avodim of nichsei tzoim barzel. What happens to those avodim of nichsei tzoim barzel? They belong to the husband. And after the husband passes away, they belong to the yarshim. Even though we learned before that the Isha can come and collect those nichsei tzoim barzel, but until she collects it, it's in the possession of the yarshim. Who is one of the yarshim here? There could be other children, but there's also a ubar. A ubar is one of the yarshim that's yarshining this eved. Because the ubar is one of the yarshim of this eved, she cannot. That eved cannot eat truma. Now, why? What's the issue? Why, if the ubar is one of the yarshim of this eved, because again it's an eved of nichsei tzoim barzel, can you not eat truma? So the Gemara will give two reasons for this. We'll see. The uber is a kayin, that's correct. And even though the eved is owned now by these children, including also the uber, which is a kayin, so similarly there's no issue. The Gemara will explain why an uber that owns this eved cannot eat truma. Now the Mishnah says, here's the rule regarding an ubar, a woman that was married and she's pregnant. Sheha ubar paisel. The halacha of a ubar is he's going to passel a woman of eating truma. When does he passel a ubar? When does he passel of eating truma? That is. So Rashi explains that if it's a bas kayin that gets married to a Yisrael. Over here, the Mishnah was talking about a Yisrael that got married to a kayin, but if it's the reverse, a bas kayin that gets married to a Yisrael, so the halach is when her husband, the Yisrael, passes away, she goes back to her father's house, and she could eat truma back in her father's house. But if she had children with the husband, with the Yisrael that she got married to, so then she never goes back to her father's house, she can't eat truma again. And that's not only if she has children, even if there's an uber. After her husband died, and there's an uber that passels her from eating truma. But on the other hand, ve'einoi meichel. If it was a bas Yisrael that got married to a kohen, and now her husband, the kohen, passes away, so if she's pregnant, if she has no other children, and she just has one ubar from this kohen that she was married to, she cannot eat truma because she's pregnant from that marriage with this kohen. If she has children from that kohen, zera, that were born, then she could eat truma. But an ubar cannot be meichel yutruma, and that's benigay to a isha, and it's the same thing also benigay to the avodim, that this eved will not be able to eat truma because of this uber. Divrei Rabbi Yosi, this is Rabbi Yosi's opinion. Amrullah, the Chachamim said to Rabbi Yosi, Me'acha sheha'adata aleinu. Now that you're testifying and you're telling us this is halacha, al bas Yisrael a kohen, that if a bas Yisrael is married to a kohen and the kohen passed away and there's a uber here, and because the avodim of tzoim barzel that she owns is also owned by this uber, so therefore you can't eat truma. So say the same thing by af bas kohen l'kohen. So why is it only a bas Yisrael that married a kohen? Why don't you say the same thing, a bas kohen that got married to a kohen umeis and the kohen passed away ve'nicha mu'beres and now she's pregnant, lo yoichlo avadeh betruma, that the avodim should not be able to eat truma b'mpnei chelkoi shel uber, because of the portion of the uber. For whatever reason, you're telling us that if the uber owns this eved, the eved cannot eat truma. So what difference does it make if the mother is a bas Yisrael or the mother is a bas kohen? The uber here is a kohen. The father is a kohen, and nevertheless you're telling me that the eved of this uber can't eat truma. So who the mother is shouldn't really matter. That's what the Chachamim taina to Rabbi Yosi. Okay, the Gemara will also explain that. Right over here, we'll see the distinction. So the Gemara says, the question was asked, taina to Rabbi Yosi. The reason for Rabbi Yosi's halacha here, that this Eved, that's now an Eved of also this Ubar, even if there's other children here, but at least a portion of the ownership is of this Ubar that's yashening here, these nichse, these avadim that are tzayin barzel. So what's the reason of Rabbi Yosi why they can't eat truma? Is it mishum de kesavar Ubar bimei zara, this Ubar that's still in the stomach, in the womb of the mother, the Bas Yisrael, zarhu. So even though when he's born, he's a Kayan, his father is a Kayan, but as long as he's not born and he's still in the mother's womb, and the mother is a Yisraelis, so he's considered to be a Zar. And therefore the Avadim, a partial ownership of these Avadim is to this Uba, which is a Zar. And therefore they can't eat Truma because of that. Is that the reason of Rabbi Yosi? Or maybe the reason of Rabbi Yosi is different. Even if this Ubar is considered to be a Kayin, even when the Ubar is in the mother's womb, but nevertheless there's a different halacha, which is Yulud Meichel She'enu Yulud Eina Meichel. If the Eved is owned by a Kayin, which is born already in the world, just like the Kayin can eat Truma, the Eved can eat Truma. But if the Kayin that owns this Eved is not born, the Eved cannot eat Truma. It's based on a pasuk here. Rashi brings V'yilid Beisai, in the Mishnah Rashi brings the pasuk V'yilid Beisai hem yechelu belachmai. So only Yilid Beisai, if the Eved is owned by a Kayin that's born, not if he's owned by an Ubar that's not born. So it's not a chesaron of the fact that he's not fully a Kayin. He is, but he's not born, and therefore the Eved can't eat Truma. So the Gemara says, Lamai nafke mina. What's the difference between these two pshatim here? So the difference is very simple. Lo Ubar b'mei kayanes. In a case where the mother is also a kehenes. So if the reason is because the mother, being in the mother's womb, this child is still like a zar because the mother is Yisraelis, so that doesn't apply in this case. But if the point is that even if the child, the ubar, is a full kayin, but being a ubar, even in the womb of a kehenes, you can't eat, the avadim can't eat truma, so then that will apply even in this case as well. So so this was discussed in the Mishnah, correct? The Gemara is going to come back to this right away. So what's the pshat over here in Rabbi Yosi's opinion? So Rabbi said, the reason of Rabbi Yosi is the kasava ubar bimei zara. The reason is because of the mother being a zara, she's a Yisraelis, so therefore the ubar in her womb is also a Yisrael. Rabbi Yosef says the reason is Yulud Meichel she'en Yulud Eina Meichel. Because this Kayin in the mother's womb is not born yet, therefore if he owns this Evet, the Evet can't eat Truma. Nothing to do with the fact that the mother is a Yisraelis. So the Gemara brings right away from what it said in the Mishnah. So Meisveh, they asked on Rav Yosef the Shaila, what did it say? Here actually the Gemara brings what it said in the Mishnah, but it brings it from a Braiser where Rav Yosef responded to the question that the Chachamim asked him. So Amr Leila Rav Yosef, they said to Rav Yosef, Me'acha sha'arata lanu, since you testified for us, Al Bas Yisrael a Kayin, regarding a Bas Yisrael that married a Kayin, that what happened, and the Kayin passed away, and now there's a Ubar, and the Avadim are owned also by this Ubar, and therefore they can't eat Trumeh. So the same thing, Bas Kayin l'Kayin. Even if the mother is a Kayin as well, so Mahu, what would be the halacha? It should be the same halacha because the Avadim that are owned by a Ubar cannot eat Trumeh. Amalehem, Rabbi Yosi answers to them, no, it's not the same thing. Zu Shamaiti, this halacha regarding a Bas Yisrael married a Kayin, that's where I heard that the Eved will not be able to eat Trumeh. But Vizu, Lo Shamaiti, regarding the case where the mother is a Kehenes, that I never heard. Over there it doesn't apply. So what's taka the reason to make a difference? So based on what we said before. So the Gemara explains, so it's well understood if you're going to say Ubar bimei zara zarhu, that the issue of this Ubar is that because he's in the mother's womb and the mother is a Yisraelis, so therefore he's also like a Yisrael. So haini de ka'amale zu shamaiti v'zu le shamaiti. That's why he's telling them that there's a difference. This halacha I heard, dafke if the mother is a Bas Yisrael, and not benegate to the case where the mother is a Kehenes. The chiluk is simple and clear. But But if the point over here is that if as long as the Kayin is still in the stage of Ubar, so then whoever he owns, the Avadim he owns, cannot eat Truma because of that. So my zu shamaiti v'zu lo shamaiti. What's he saying? I heard the halacha only regarding if the mother is a Yisraelis and not if the mother is a Kehenes. What's the difference? He. It's literally the same thing. The point over here is that a Ubar cannot be Meichel Truma. And even if the ubar is only one portion that is in the ownership of this eved, you can't eat truma either. So it's exactly the same thing. So what is he answering? Says the Gemara Kashya. This taka remains a question on what Rav Yosef said. You clearly see over here that there has to be a distinction. So the Gemara Amar Rav Yudah Mashmuel Zu Divrei Rav Yosi. This halacha that it said in our Mishnah that you can't eat truma because of this ubar. This is all Rav Yosi's opinion. And now the point that the Gemara is going to focus on over here is, what's the basis of this halacha? You see over here that even a ubar yarshins, he inherits. If there's no halacha of Yerusha regarding a ubar, so then this whole halacha doesn't apply, that there's a certain portion of this eved that the ubar owns. So Rabbi Yosi holds that the ubar has a chelik in this Yerusha, and therefore the avadim can't eat truma. But the Chachamim say, Yesh loy banim, if besides this ubar there are other children here, so then oichlim mishum banim. So then the avadim could eat truma because these avadim are owned by the other children that are born, and those other children are kayanim, and they could eat truma, so the avadim could eat truma. There's the ubar here, we disregard the ubar. The ubar is not yoirish b'chlal. Or if ein leid banim, even if this kayan did not have any children, so these avadim, again we're talking about the avadim of nichsei tzayin barzel that belong to the husband, and they're yarshin by whoever yarshins the husband, the kayan. So if he has no children, oichlim mishum achim. So then the brothers, the ones that yarshin, so the brothers that are kayanim, so these avadim will be able to eat because of the brothers. Ein loy achim, if he has no brothers, oichlim mishum mishpacha, there could be further distant relatives that they are kayanim, and these avadim will eat truma because of those relatives and those kayanim that eat truma. Mishum mishpacha kula, the entire mishpacha. So the point over here again is that according to the Chachamim, the ubar has no chelik in this Yerusha b'chlal. So he doesn't interfere with this kayach of the avadim to eat truma because they're now owned by whichever yershim there are that are eating truma. So the Gemara says, now the Gemara is medayik in the lashon of Shmuel. What did Shmuel say? Zu divrei Rab Yosi. This is Rab Yosi's opinion. So the Gemara says it's mashma zu v'loi svirle. That this is Rabbi Yosi's opinion, but he disagrees with this. Meaning that Shmuel would hold that there's no Yerusha for an ubar, and therefore he disagrees with Rabbi Yosi. But fragt the Gemara, ha'amalei Shmuel Rav Chana bagad ta. Shmuel said Rav Chana bagad ta. There's two pshatim in this. Over here Rashi brings two pshatim. One pshat is that he was a Bala Goda. He would say the drush of Agadata, or he came from Baghdad, in Bavel. So he told him, Puk aisli be'asara, go bring me 10 people, de'emalach b'ampaya, because I want to tell you in their presence an important halacha that they should all hear. Hamezake lo uber kana. A person that's mezake, that he wants to give a Yerusha over for a ubar, so or sell something to a ubar, an ubar could be kaina. So even a ubar has a kayach to be kaina, and therefore we see that Shmuel holds that a ubar is part of the Yerusha. So if a uber is part of the Yerusha, it's exactly the basis of Rabbi Yosi's opinion. So why did he say zu, that this is Rabbi Yosi's opinion? Makes it sound like that he disagrees. So the Gemara says, no, he does agree. Ella, rather, zu v'svirale. He's saying this is Rabbi Yosi's opinion, and he agrees to Rabbi Yosi. So the Gemara explains now, my kamash malon. What was the chiddush here of Shmuel? The pligi rabbanon alei de Rabbi Yosi. He came to say that even though this is Rabbi Yosi's opinion, and he actually agrees to Rabbi Yosi, but he's coming to tell you that the Rabbanon disagree with Rabbi Yosi, and they say that the uber doesn't interfere at all, the uber doesn't yarshin. So the Gemara asks him this, but umi pligi, do the Rabbanon argue on Rabbi Yosi? Must have Rab Zakai, or the Bach is going to say, for ha'amar Rab Zakai said, zu eidos heid Rabbi Yosi mi pishmayev avtalyan. This eidos about this halacha, he said in the name of Shmaya v'avtalyan, and v'hoidu loy, and the Chachamim agreed to him. So we see that they did not argue with him about this halacha. Amar Ravashi, so Ravashi says, mikatani v'kiblu, does it say that the Chachamim accepted this halacha? V'hoidu loy katani. It means that they agreed to him. What's the difference? They were made the mistavet taime. They were telling him, according to what you're saying, that the ubar is going to be Yiddish, so then the problem that you're saying regarding the avadim, that because they're partially owned by this ubar, they can't eat truma, it'll be true. Your reasoning is true. But we l'chatchila disagree with the entire shitta that you're saying, that the uber is Yiddish. So if a uber is not Yiddish, then it's going to come out that the uber doesn't interfere with the kayach of these avadim that are owned by the yarshim to be able to eat truma. But so they didn't agree to the actual halacha. They only agreed to his reasoning. Now the Gemara brings a braise where you have a lot more details beneged to this entire halacha. There's a few opinions in this braise, and there's much more details that the Mishnah did not say. Tana Rabbanon, so in the braise we learned Tiniach Banim Akayin. So it was married to a Bas Yisrael, and he passes away, and he left children that were Kayanim. So now there's avodim here. There's avodim that were owned by this husband, by the Kayan. And there are two types of avodim. Elu ve'elu. Two different types of avodim, oichlim. They could all eat truma. What does elu ve'elu refer to? So this is going back to the two categories of avodim, that the Isha brought in as nichsei malug, which are really her avodim. The husband is just using them while he's alive. And the nichsei tzayin barzel, which really belong to the husband, and he takes responsibility for them. So both of them could eat truma. So as Rashi says, the nichsei malug could eat truma because the mother here now can eat truma. So they, which are owned by the mother, could eat truma as well. The nichsei tzayin barzel that are owned by these children, the kayanim, so that the children can eat truma. So the avodim eat truma. That's simple. Hinichamu beres, if she's pregnant, there's no other children there, but she's pregnant from this kayan that she was married to. So then, elu ve'elu ein oichlim. So none of them could eat any truma. The mother cannot eat truma. Like we said before, a mother that was married to a kayan, if she had no children from the kayanim, she only was muberes from this kayan, she can't eat truma, so her avodim can't eat truma either. And the avodim of tzayin barzel that are owned by this uber now, he's the single yairish here, so you can't eat truma. Like Rabbi Yossi said in the Mishnah, that the avodim owned by the uber can't eat truma. Hiniach banim v'hinicha muberes. This was the case of our Mishnah. If the Bas Yisrael was married to a Kayin and he passed away, and now she had children from this Kayin, and there's also a muberes, she's also pregnant. So avdi milug oichlim. So the avdi milug that she owns, those are her avodim now. So they can eat truma kederech sheyacheles, just like she can eat truma. She has children from this marriage that are kainim, and that because of that the mother can eat truma. So the avodim, her avodim, could also eat truma. Avdei tzayin barzel lo yoichlu. But the avdei tzayin barzel that are still in the possession of these yarshim, and now one of the yarshim is this ubar, so they cannot eat truma. Mipnei chelkai shel ubar, because of the portion of the ubar. This is the exact halacha of the Mishnah, and like the Mishnah said, shah ubar paisel ve'ena meichel. The halacha of a ubar is that he passes of eating truma. In a case of a bas kayin that was married to a Yisrael, and ve'ena meichel, and he's not meichel truma in the case of a bas Yisrael married to a kayin, and also regarding the avodim, like we learned in the Mishnah. Divrei Rabbi Yossi, this is the Rabbi Yossi of the Mishnah. Rabbi Shmuel, but Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yossi, so he said, Mishum Aviv, in the name of his father, Habas ma'acheles, a daughter that was born from this marriage, so because of her, she will be meichel, the avodim of tzayin barzel truma, but haben ain't a meichel. But the son that's born over here will not be meichel these avodim truma. Now this is very difficult to understand. What should be the difference between them? And the Gemara will soon explain this. Now, third opinion here, Rab Shimon ben Yochi Yomer, Rab Shimon ben Yochi says, Zecharim yoichlu kulan. If she was married to this kayan and she gave birth to boys, to Zecharim, so now all the avodim can eat truma because they're owned by these Zecharim. And they're kayanim, so just like they can eat truma, the avodim can eat truma. Nekevais lo yoichlu. But if she gave birth to nekevais, to girls, and the avodim of tzayin barzel are owned now by these nekevais that are the only yarshim at this point, but they can't eat truma because of being owned by these nekevais. Why not? Because shema yimtze ubar zachar, because perhaps the ubar that she's pregnant with will be a zachar, and ve'ein lebanais b'makim haben klum. What's the halacha? When a person has daughters and sons, so if he has a son, the son gets the full Yerusha. There's no Yerusha min HaTorah for a daughter. So therefore, it could be that if she's pregnant, so this child that's born might be a ben, and therefore the son is the one that's yarshaning these avodim. The daughters don't yarshan anything, so these avodim are really owned only by that ben that she's pregnant with, and not by these banis at all. So therefore, they can't eat any truma. So the Gemara will focus first on Rab Shimon ben Yochi's opinion, and then afterwards the Gemara will come back to what it said before in Rab Shmuel ben Rab Yossi. So first the Gemara focuses on the last thing that it just said over here. And again, the case over here is that she only has daughters now, And we say that even though the Avadim are owned by these daughters, they are the Yarishim, but nevertheless, because she's pregnant and that child born might be a Ben, and that Ben will be the Yairish, and if so, the Avadim are owned by that Ben that she's Mu'uberes with, a Uber can't be Meichel Truma. That's the point Rabbi Shimon ben Yochi says. The Gemara asks on this, my area, Shem Yimtza Uber Zochar. Why is he saying that? The issue is because maybe the child that she's pregnant with will be a Zachar and he will be the sole Yairish. Typically, even if, say the same thing, even the Nekeva, even if that child that she's pregnant with is a Nekeva, Nami Pasla, that would also passel these Avadim of eating Truma, like we said before, as long as even a portion of the ownership of these Avadim is from this pregnancy. So that also passels the avodim of eating truma. Not only if the sole yairish is that uber. So the Gemara says, you're right. Chada v'oid ka'amar. There's one point, like we just said, and then there's an additional point, that he might be a zachar. Chada, number one, the nekeva nami pasla. Even if that ibor, she's a nekeva, so she has a portion in the ownership of these avodim, so she passels the avodim of eating truma. And v'oid, another point, shama yimtzu b'zachar. Possibly, she's pregnant with a zachar, and ve'in lebanas b'makam ben klum. And therefore, the daughters here don't yashin anything. The son, she's muberes with yashins everything, and therefore they can't eat any truma. Another point, now going back to what Rav Shimon ben Yochi said in the beginning, so he said, Zecharim yoichlu. That if she has Zecharim, children that are born, so then the Avadim that are owned by these Zecharim could eat truma, because these Zecharim are kainim, and the Avadim that are nichset zayin barzal are owned by these Zecharim. Fragt the Gemara, but this price is speaking about a case that the mother, she's mu'uberes as well. V'ha'ike uber. She's mu'uberes as well, and if so, anytime there's an ibur, that ibur prevents the avadim of eating truma. So why is Rav Shimon ben Yochi ignoring that? So the Gemara says, he actually argues on this. He argues on Rabbi Yosi. Why? Kasavar, he holds, ein chayshishin lemiyuta. That when she's pregnant, so we're not going to be concerned about a case which is a minority. What is this? Why is this a minority over here? So Rashi explains that who's this child that she's pregnant with? It could be either a zachar or a nekeva. So that's a 50-50. If the child that's born is only a nekeva, the nekeva doesn't have any portion of ownership in this Yerusha, in these avadim. Now, besides that 50-50, there's also another percent that she may miscarry. And therefore, there won't be the uber will not interfere with this Yerusha either. So it comes out that the majority of possibilities is that the uber is not interfering at all with the Yerusha that the live children own these avadim. So therefore they can eat truma because of those live children that they are owned by. And the uber is a miyut and doesn't interfere with this. That's one pshat. Another pshat is really he holds that we do have to be concerned about that uber that has a partial ownership in these avadim, and it could be that the uber is a zachar, and therefore he could interfere with the eating of the truma of these avadim. But the reason why we say that they can eat truma is the avdinan leit takanta. What we do is we make a takana, and the takana over here is that when they come to distribute the Yerusha, what we say is these avadim will be owned only by the live children. The uber should have no portion in the ownership of these avadim. The uber will yashin something else. They machalik the Yerusha in such a way that these avadim should not be prevented from eating truma. That's the takana that Chachamim make, that the way they distribute the Yerusha. And the Gemara brings a source for this. Could Rav Nachman or Mashmuel, like what Rav Nachman or Mashmuel says, that we could make this kind of distribution of the Yerusha. Rav Nachman or Mashmuel. So he said as follows: Yisayimim shabal lachlik b'nichsi avim. You have Yisayimim, and Rashi says we're speaking about Yisayimim that are ketanim, and therefore they can't do the chalukah, they can't divide the properties and the possessions on their own. So they want to divide the property. So what do? Bezdin mamidin lahem apetrupis. Bezdin gives them a caretaker, a petrupis, that takes care of this and divides it. Ubayder lahem chelik yafe, and the petrupis chooses for each one of them a good portion that he deserves. But the first opinion here is higdilu yechaylon limchais. In the name of Shmuel, he said that the apetrupis gives each one a good portion, but when they get older, they can protest and say that they don't want this portion and they want something else. So meaning that this chalukah is not something that really is going to last necessarily. But for Rav Nachman Didei Rav Nachman himself says, even after they mature, they're older, they cannot protest against this. Once they was distributed by this apotropos through the Bezdin, so that remains forever. And he explains, if you're going to say that Bezdin comes and gives a caretaker, and then later they can protest against this, so then what power does the Bezdin have over here? This is a zilusa de Beidine. It comes and it makes the whole thing that Bezdin set up as it gets disgraced. The people look at what Bezdin did as something which is worthless. So once it's split this way, it's split this way. So the Gemara is basing this on Rav Nachman's opinion that over here as well, when you have these avodim, so the apotropos comes along and makes the sakana, and he divides it in this way, and this division is going to last forever. That the ubar does not get a portion in these avodim. Says the Gemara, so if so, leimed Rav Nachman Tanoihi. So maybe we should say that what Rav Nachman here said is a machlokes Tanoim. Because the Tanakami here in this Braisa, Rabbi Yosi, he disagreed with Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Tanakami in the Braisa said that if there's a uber, there's an issue. The uber has a portion of ownership in these avadim. So apparently, Rabbi Yosi held that we can't rely on Rav Nachman and dividing it in this way, and that the division remains like this forever, that this uber does not have a portion in these avadim. Says the Gemara, loy, not necessarily. The kul alme islu de Rav Nachman. Everybody would agree to Rav Nachman that you could make this takana and you could divide it in a way that the uber does not have any ownership in these avodim. But over here, we're talking about a case where they did not make this takana, they did not divide it in this way for whatever reason. And v'hache, going back to the first pshat, we said, b'chayshishin l'miyute kamiflagi. Whether we're concerned about the miyut, as Rashi explained before, the uber is a miyut. The uber might be a zachar, but there also may be a miscarriage. So are we chayshish for that miyut to interfere the eating of the truma by these avadim? That's what the argument is based on. Now going back to the previous opinion in the Braisa, Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yosi. So what did he say? Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yosi Aimer mishum aviv habas again mishum aviv, that is. Again, let me read this again. Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yosi Aimer mishum aviv. Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yosi says in the name of his father, which is Rabbi Yosi actually, right? So, and he was the first opinion in this Braisa. Habas Michael. So again, what's the case here? We're speaking about this mother that was married to a Kayin, and now she's pregnant, and now but there's a daughter that's born over here already. So if you have a daughter that's already born, so because of this daughter that's the owner of these avadim, the avadim kiri trume, but aben ena Michael. If she has a son that's already born and they're owned by the son, you can't eat truma. So the Gemara wants to understand what's the difference. So what's the difference? If she already has a son that's born, the avodim can't eat truma, like the opinion of Rabbi Yosi, mishum chelka yishal uber, because of the portion of the uber that prevents the avodim of eating truma. So Basnami, if she has a daughter that's born, and at this point the daughter is the Yiddish, they shouldn't be able to eat truma because of the portion of the uber that prevents from eating truma. What's the difference? Amar Abaye, so Abaye explains that this halacha of Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yosi was speaking about a very specific case, and that is hacha b'nechasim u'atem askinon. We're speaking about a case where this person, that when he died, there's very little money that he left over. So the halacha here is, as Rashi brings from the Gemara of Ksubis, so usually only sons yarshin. A daughter does not yarshin at all. However, after the son's yarshin, the money that's left over has to be used to support, to feed the daughters. So they shouldn't have to go and beg on and knock on doors to beg for money for themselves. What happens if there's nechasim u'atim? There's only very little money to support these daughters. They get that money for their support. It's the kanim d'Rabbana that they get that money, and the banim don't yashin anything. That's what this case was speaking about over here. There's nechasim u'atim. There's very little money, and therefore the daughters are the one that midrabanan, they're the ones that yarshin. And the kagain, the ikke ben bahadi bas. And there's also a son over here, together with this bas. When Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yosi said that if there's a daughter, then the avadim kirit, he didn't mean if there's only a daughter. What he meant to say is, if there's a son and a daughter, it's one point of the case, and another point of the case is that there's nechasim u'atin, which means that only the daughter is yarshining and not the son. But now the point of here is, the fact that the daughter is yarshining is a takana midrabanan. In such a case, when there's nechasim u'atim, and there's a son and a daughter, minatayra, the son has to yarshin. Rabbanan made a takana that only the daughter yarshins. Okay, so now, in such a case, manavshach, looking now at the ibur, she's also pregnant. So no matter who she's pregnant with, whether she's pregnant with a son, or she's pregnant with a daughter that will not interfere with this ownership of this daughter that she has over these avodim, which is that nechasim mu'atim that she's yarshening. And again, the pregnancy, the ubar does not interfere with this. Why? Either who is this pregnancy? Is it a son or is it a daughter? Either way, it's not going to interfere. Why not? If this one that she's pregnant with is also a son, so it's the same halacha as the son that's alive. That son that's alive doesn't yarshin at all because it's nechas muatim, so the daughter yarshin. So this son that she might be pregnant with doesn't interfere at all. Ibasi, if she is a daughter, the one that she's pregnant with, so amayachla. So over here, you might say, so this daughter should get a portion of this Yerusha. Because by the case of Nechasim Mu'atim, the daughter gets. So the Gemara says, no, in this case though, the daughter that gets is only getting because of a takana midrabanan. The daughter is not getting a Yerusha min atayre here. The daughter is yarshining only as a takana midrabanan because it's Nechasim Mu'atim and we want to give the money to support these girls. So kama delinafik la'avira oilam le'tekinu rabbanan. That takana midrabanan is only for the girls once they're born, and they have to have mufut to eat. But for this mu'uberes, there's no chacham weren't misakin for her that she should eat anything. So therefore, even if she's pregnant with a girl, she doesn't have any portion in this Yerusha of these avadim. She doesn't interfere this Yerusha at all. Right, so Rashi explains this last point here is the reason why the Gemara says that the case is that there's a girl and a boy here. There's both. If there would be only a girl, so then this girl would be yarshening min atayre, and then that girl that she would be mu'uberes with, if she's mu'uberes with a girl, would also yarshen min atayre, and she would interfere with the avodim eating truma. But because it's only a Yerusha midrabanan, so we could say Rabbanan we're misakin this only for the girl that's born and not for the girl that's not in the world yet. That's that. So this is a very specific case that Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yosi was referring to. So the Gemara says, "B'maya kimta." What are you saying? What was Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yosi speaking about? B'nechasim mu'atim. By a case over here where the Yerusha there's very little money, and therefore the daughters are the ones that yarshin, not the sons. But Eim Seifa, what does it say afterwards in the Braisa that we quoted before, in the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochi, that Shema Yimtza Ubar Zachar. That if they're on a kavis, so even though they own now these avadim, but nevertheless, if the uber will be a zachar, so the zachar will yarshin, so therefore the avadim can't eat. And the ein lebana is b'makim ben klum. If the uber is a zachar, then the daughters don't yarshin anything. But now, according to what you said, adarabah, on the contrary, nechasim muatim the banisninu. If the case over here is that there's very little money, and therefore all the money goes to support the daughters, so everything belongs to them. And the Zachar gets nothing. So why is he saying that we're concerned that he would be a Zachar? So the Gemara says, you're right, according to this pshat, we'll have to say, Seifa asan l'nechasim merubim. That the Seifa is speaking about a case where there is a lot of money, and there's enough for the ben to yarshin, and therefore his Yerusha will interfere in the ownership of these avadim. So we're going to have to say it's two different cases here. But the Gemara has another question on the whole halacha here. Is this halacha true that in a case where there's very little money and therefore there's a takana that you have to support the girls and they get this money, could you say that this money really totally belongs to them? And therefore these avadim totally belong to these kevais, and therefore they can eat truma. But so he said as follows: if the Yisayimim, the boys, went ahead and they took all of this money and they sold it, even though it was supposed to go to these girls to support them, but they went ahead and sold it. Masha machru, the sale that they did takes effect. So what do you see from this? So since you see that they have the power to sell it, what that really means is it's still in their possession. There's a takana of chachamim that you have to give it to support these girls, but it is still in their possession. So if so, these avadim belong to the banim as well, and if the mother is mu'beres with a ben, it belongs to that ben that she's mu'ober with, and that should prevent the avadim of eating truma. So this whole answer it does not hold. So the Gemara says, Ve'ela, we're going to have to say, my basta ketani. When Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yosi said that if there's a daughter here, he didn't really mean a daughter b'chlal. It means aim. It means the mother. All it meant to say is that the mother that owns her avadim, going back to the avadim which are nichse mulug, her avadim they can eat truma. The avodim that are not her avodim, the avodim that are nichseit tzayim barzel, can't eat truma because of the mu'uberes that are preventing them from eating truma. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the pshat, ihachi haina Rabbi Yosi. If so, that's exactly Rabbi Yosi's opinion that was quoted right before this in the Braisa. So the Gemara says, Anachanami, Kula Rabbi Shmuel but Rabbi Yosi. This entire Braisa is Rabbi Shmuel but Rabbi Yosi. Katani La, he taught this entire Braisa. And Rabbi Shmuel but Rabbi Yosi is just spelling out what his father Rabbi Yosi said, but he's not coming to argue with his father Rabbi Yosi. Okay, we'll stop over here for today. Start to know in here. Okay.